So today we're going to be looking at a period of reconstruction and expansion after the Boudican revolt. And so we're looking at the governors post Suetonius Paulinus up until the arrival of Agricola. We're going to hope to evaluate the situation in Britain after the Boudican revolt, to look at Roman policy after the Boudican revolt, and the governorship of Petronius Turpilianus, Trebellius Maximus, and Vettius Bolanus, and also to study the campaigns of Cerealis and Frontinus, and assess how far they paved the way for Agricola's success. Just a recap then on the governors that we've come across so far in Roman Britain. Our first governor is Aulus Plautius from 43 to 47. We then have Publius Ostorius Scapula from 47 to 52, then Didius Gallus from 52 to 57, Quintus Veranius Nepos from 57 to 58, and then Suetonius Paulinus 58 to 61. Now, post-Boudican revolt, we do have evidence for Paulinus's retribution in the aftermath of the revolt. Most of our information from the aftermath of the revolt comes from Tacitus's annals. Dio doesn't really deal with events after the revolt, but we are told that the 14th Legion received the triumphant title of Martia Victrix, so you're victorious in war, and the 20th Legion get the triumphant title of Valeria Victrix, so valiant in victory. Now, these kind of triumphant titles are important because they are awarded to a legion after a significant victory, a significant campaign. And so the fact that these two legions in Britain get these triumphant titles does indicate to us that the Boudican revolt was a serious revolt. The legions are rewarded for their success. We also learn that there are reinforcements brought in from Germany. We have 2,000 legionary infantry troops to bring the 9th back up to strength, 8 cohorts of auxiliary infantry, and 1,000 auxiliary cavalry. That perhaps gives us an indication of the extent of Roman casualties actually throughout the Boudican revolt, that there is a significant number of reinforcements who are brought into Britain. The auxiliaries are placed in new winter quarters, and the legionaries apparently remained on active operations. Now, Tacitus, in his overview of the Flavian period, tells us Britain conquered, then allowed to slip from our grasp in his histories. And what we want to do really is kind of assess what does he mean by this. It's pretty clear he means that in the Flavian period, the whole of Britain is conquered. But what exactly does he mean by allowed to slip from our grasp? That's an important question post-Boudican. So our next governor after Suetonius Paulinus is Petronius Turpilianus, and he then gives way to Trebellius Maximus. Now, a little note on Suetonius before we move on to these two governors. Suetonius puts down the Boudican revolt successfully. Tacitus does imply that his retribution afterwards is extreme. And remember that the new procurator, Julius Classicianus, appears to be in some sort of feud with Suetonius. The review carried out by Polyclitus doesn't find any wrongdoing, but it's not long after that there is this pretense of some ships being lost and Suetonius is sent back to Rome. So it may be here that there is a conscious decision by the emperor to try and placate the situation in Britain and get rid of Suetonius and replace him by someone who is more conciliatory. Tacitus isn't impressed with these governors. And he tells us that Turpilianus neither aggravated the enemy, nor was he himself provoked, and he dignified this lazy inactivity with the honourable name of peace. So very negative in his attitude towards Turpilianus. But there are some important things to think about. We've just had a serious revolt in Britain, which has caused significant loss of Roman lives. And it is written about as if it's a real threat to Roman rule in Britain, that it could have been the end of the province. Remember that Suetonius, in his biography of Nero, tells us that at some point Nero considers withdrawing from Britain entirely. Now, in AD 67, Nero does withdraw one legion for the war against Parthia. But rather than this telling us about the situation being unsettled in Britain and not being able to cope with the situation, the fact that Nero is able to withdraw a legion tells us something quite different. I mean, as far as the situation in Britain is concerned, if you're able to take a legion out and only leave 3 legions to control the province, that indicates that the situation is settled, that there isn't a threat to the military of Rome. And it implies then that although Turpilianus and Maximus didn't focus on expanding the province, they were successful because they ensured that Britain settled down after the Boudican revolt and flourished as a province, certainly sort of the southeast of Britain. And it's possibly we could criticise Tacitus for being somewhat unfair in his assessment of the situation. Because things do get better after the Boudican revolt. There is a period of increasing economic prosperity in Britain. There's a rebuilding boom, particularly in London. There's evidence as well of new building in Bath as well. And also we have vast quantities of Roman goods. So, for example, Samian ware, which is mould decorated pottery, as in it comes from a mould, not it's decorated with mould. These Roman goods flood into Britain. So this perhaps gives us an indication of increasing Romanisation in the south of Britain. You've got an example there of a Samian ware bowl, characteristic of Roman pottery. But then, at the end of AD 68, Nero commits suicide, allegedly with the final comment, "What an artist dies in me." And Rome is then plunged into a period of civil war, which is called the Year of the Four Emperors, but that I like to call Snog, Marry, Avoid, Make Emperor. And what we have are this series of contenders, essentially, who rule Rome for a very short period of time. So firstly, we have Galba. And after Nero's suicide, he's been declared an enemy of the state by the Senate. We have this period of civil war. The Praetorian Guard transfer their loyalty from Nero to Galba, and Galba is recognised as emperor. But once he is ensconced in that role, he goes back on many of his promises. And the legions in Germany wanted a different guy, Vitellius, as emperor. So along comes Otho. And Otho bribes the Praetorian Guard, who kill Galba. But Vitellius is already on his way with a plan to take over the emperor. And Otho offered peace, which was refused. And he commits suicide because he has lost. And that then leaves us with Vitellius. On the news of Otho's suicide, Vitellius is recognised as emperor. Unfortunately, Vitellius is an extremely extravagant and corrupt emperor, and there follows banquets, triumphal parades that bring the treasury to bankruptcy. And in his quest to get money, he tortures and kills moneylenders who demand payment. He plans to kill citizens who name him as their heir, often along with any co-heirs as well. So he finds out who has left him money in their wills and makes plans to bump them off. And he also assassinates his rivals. So he's incredibly power hungry and ruthless in how he achieves power. However, Vespasian is declared emperor by several legions, and Vitellius is murdered. The Senate declare Vespasian emperor on December 21st in AD 69, and this then leads to what we call the Flavian dynasty. Our first dynasty, remember, the Julio-Claudian dynasty, and our next dynasty of emperors now, the Flavian dynasty. So what was going on in Britain during this upheaval in Rome? Well, according to Tacitus in his histories, very little. Britain seems to remain settled during this period of civil war, which perhaps indicates, again, how successful Petronius and Maximus have been, because there's no attempt in Britain to revolt again. However, Tacitus in his histories does tell us about the conflict between Trebellius Maximus and the legate of the 20th Legion. And Maximus is replaced as governor by Boudican, and the 14th Legion are sent back to Britain. Now, this could indicate that there is perhaps trouble brewing in Britain, or it could indicate that the new emperor wants to send the 14th Legion out of the way where they're not going to cause any trouble. So what we have in Britain at the end of AD 69, we have a new governor, Vettius Bolanus. He governed with a gentler hand than a warlike province requires, according to Tacitus. So we can see there is a theme here, in his opinion, of British governors. Tacitus likes those governors who expand the province and is far more critical of those who focus more on consolidation and conciliation. The other key event that happens in AD 69 is another period of civil war in Brigantia. So we could perhaps argue that Venutius does decide to take advantage of the situation in Rome in order to execute his own plans. So we've got trouble up north again. Cartimandua has divorced Venutius, and she has made his armour-bearer Velicatus her husband. Venutius is also taking advantage of the instability in the empire. Bolanus manages to rescue Cartimandua, but he does not manage to regain control over Brigantia. Now, at this point, Cartimandua disappears from our records. We have no idea what happens to her. But we are left with a hostile power led by Venutius on the Roman flank. And this is too dangerous. Remember that Rome likes to govern by surrounding its provinces with client states. In the case of Britain, the Brigantes would create a buffer between Caledonia and the Roman province. And without that buffer, the situation becomes too dangerous. So preparations are made for annexation. And Tacitus tells us that we were left with a war to fight. There is, though, perhaps another reason, something else going on with the political situation in Rome, which might influence a decision for military action in Britain. And that is, of course, Vespasian becoming emperor. We know from past experience that emperors like to, when they become emperor, do something which consolidates their position, which indicates their status, that highlights how successful they are as an emperor. With Claudius, for example, he becomes emperor in AD 41, and within 2 years the invasion of Britain is effected. So another reason for expansion in Britain might be for Vespasian to demonstrate his ability as emperor to bring a new area into the Roman Empire. And you may argue that actually it makes sense that Vespasian chooses Britain, because of course he has been here before. If you remember Suetonius' biography of Vespasian, it tells us about him being involved in the conquest of the southwest of Britain. Also, Josephus's Jewish War makes reference to Vespasian's success in Britain as well. And so we now have the two governors who are appointed by Vespasian. Bolanus was appointed by Vitellius, and he is called back in 71, and Petilius Cerealis becomes the next governor. His name should also ring a bell, because he commanded the 9th Legion during the Iceni revolt. And the 2nd Legion arrives in Britain and moves to Lincoln. The 14th had again been removed in AD 70 and sent to Germany. They're a bit like the Hokey Cokey Legion, there's one legion in, there's one legion out. So we have this movement of legions in and out of Britain. And Cerealis leads the 9th Legion from Lincoln into Brigantia. He establishes a fort at York and defeats the Brigantes at possibly Stanwick Hill Fort, which is a Brigantian stronghold in present-day North York. The remains are still visible today. Obviously, the building there in the picture is a modern building, but you can see the remains of earthen ramparts. Again, we don't know, whether there was a particular battle at Stanwick or not, but it's a possible place for such a battle to have taken place. And so we have the advance north. Cerealis establishes a fort at Corbridge near the River Tyne, and the 20th Legion, commanded by Agricola, establish a fort at Carlisle near the Solway. So you've sort of got this pincer movement of the two military commanders moving north, Cerealis up the east coast of Britain and Agricola up the west coast of Britain. And what you've got there with a fort at Carlisle and a fort at Corbridge is the beginning of the Solway-Tyne line. Now, the Solway-Tyne line is very important in terms of thinking about frontiers in Britain, because firstly, at the end of the 1st century, it becomes the Staingate line. And then secondly, in 122, it's the location chosen to build Hadrian's Wall. Tacitus tells us about this period that there were numerous battles, some of them bloody. So again, this may be a period of time in which there are significant Roman casualties. Our next governor is Julius Frontinus, and he's governor from 73 or 74 until 77. He focuses his energies on Wales. He attacks and defeats the Silures with the 2nd Legion and establishes a fort at Caerleon, which is in the south of modern-day Wales. He also establishes forts in mid-Wales and probably begins construction of the fort at Chester with the 20th Legion. You remember that there is a piece of lead water pipe found at Chester which has Agricola's name inscribed on it. So that indicates to us that Agricola was certainly involved in the latter stages of constructing the fort, but it probably begins its construction under Frontinus. He hadn't quite completed the conquest of the Ordovices in the north by the time he was recalled, either in 77 or 78. The dating for this period is a little bit uncertain. We know that Agricola either becomes governor in 77 or 78. You can either, use 77/78 or just pick a date and then, go with it. There is a lot of evidence for troop movement and redeployment in this period. And we get that from archaeological evidence in the form of the remains of forts. So we see several forts being abandoned, particularly in the southeast, and others being built or enlarged. Now, the fact that forts are abandoned in the southeast might indicate there that you've got a Romanised Romano-British province that is kind of fully integrated into the empire. And many of the new forts are on the Welsh border or along the Bristol Channel. So it's focusing on those areas of Britain that are not yet under complete control. Note the amount of effort that the Romans put into Wales, by the way. we might question why the Romans put so much effort into Wales when they withdraw from Caledonia fairly quickly. One key thing to remember here is the importance of mineral resources. Wales had gold, and there are still extensive remains of Roman gold mines in Wales. That probably indicates to us why the Romans felt that Wales was worth this energy. And of course, it's not all military during this period. So far, we've focused on kind of military policy post Boudican revolt. And we've seen that immediately after the revolt, policy seems to be about consolidation, settling things down. And then we have a change of policy when Vespasian becomes emperor. However, it's important to think about civic changes in society at this time. And the period after the Boudican revolt was also a time of increased Romanisation. Colchester, St Albans and London are rebuilt. We have a period of major public building taking place in London fairly soon after the revolt. And this culminates in the establishment of a huge forum and basilica complex. Now, these buildings are highly Romanized, that they indicate people adopting a Roman way of life. The forum at St Albans or Verulamium is completed in AD 79. That's the forum inscription that names Agricola. And there seems to have been a general grant of self-government for all the civitas capitals during this time. Now, it might be worth just having a little look at the way that towns were named in Roman Britain. We've already come across colonies, colonia, and we know that these are the big Roman towns that have been established for veterans who've retired from the Roman army. The key one we've come across so far is Colchester. There are other Roman colonies established later on as well. The second type of town, this civitas capital, is a kind of a civic capital for the Romano-British population. So kind of a tribal capital in a way. I suppose you could kind of correlate them to sort of, county towns today, really. And what we see during this time is the British population taking on an active role in self-government. So therefore, there's a much greater effort to involve the Britons in the running of the province. We also start to have the first villas appearing at this time. Early examples at Angmering, and we've already seen Fishbourne Palace in Sussex, and also Eccles in Kent. It's not clear whether these villas are built for wealthy Britons or for members of the Roman administration, but we are seeing significant numbers of much more Romanised buildings being built. So if we think about our governors so far then, it is really important to remember their names and their dates. So we've got Plautius from 43 to 47, Ostorius from 47 to 52, Didius from 52 to 57, Veranius from 57 to 58, Paulinus from 58 to 62, Terpullianus from 62 to 63, Trebellius from 63 to 69, Bolanus from 69 to 71, Cerealis from 71 to 74, and Frontinus 74 to 78. Or you might just want to, squidge the dates one year back. One way in which you might want to consider remembering the names of is to write some sort of mnemonic. A mnemonic is a sentence that you come up with to help you remember something. One suggested by the Association of, I think, Classical Teachers is proud old dads vainly pretend that their boys can fight. And you can see there Plautius, Ostorius, Didius, Veranius, etc. Or you can come up with your own sentence, which can be as silly as you like, as long as it helps you remember those key names and the order that they came in. Just to finish looking at this period then, A couple of key archaeological pieces of evidence. Again, we've got tombstones. Now, remember, we've looked at tombstones. We've thought about the sorts of things that you can say about tombstones. The sorts of things you can say are the same for all tombstones. You're looking at the rough period that they date from. Obviously, we can't date them precisely because we're not given a date of death. But by looking at, things on them and corresponding evidence, we can come up with a rough date for them. They tell us about the movements of the army. So they tell us where auxiliary troops were stationed. They tell us where legionary troops were stationed. They also perhaps give us evidence for Roman troops dying in battle at around these locations and these times. So we've got another cavalry tombstone to start us off, Rufus Caesar from Thrace, and this comes from the late 60s. It's found in Wootton near Gloucester, and it tells us that Rufus Caesar, a horse trooper of the 6th cohort of Thracians, 40 years old, served for 22 years. His heirs, as stipulated in his will, attended to the making of this memorial. He lies here. Note that familiar iconography of the Roman cavalry soldier trampling on the naked barbarian. We also know cavalrymen were not usually Roman citizens, and this is confirmed because Rufus only has 2 names. The citizens would have that trianomina, and their tombstones would also mention their father's name and their voting tribe, whereas we don't get that with the auxiliary troops. So here we have a late 60s cavalryman found in the area of Gloucester. And we've also got Titus Valerius Pudens, who is of the 2nd Dietrich's Legion. Note that there are 2 second legions, the 2nd Legion of Dietrich's and the 2nd Legion Augusta. And this tombstone dates from somewhere between 71 to 79. It's found at Lincoln, and the inscription tells us Titus Valerius Pudens, son of Titus, of the Claudian voting tribe from Severia, which is a colony in present-day Hungary, a soldier of the 2nd Legion at Dietrich's Pia Fidelis, in the century of Decius Proculus, aged 30, of 6 years' service. Here he lies. His heir, at his own expense, set this up. And if you compare this with the previous tombstone, you can see there you've got the trianomina of the Roman citizen, you've got the mention of the father, the mention of the voting tribe as well. And so here you've got the tombstone of a legionary soldier rather than an auxiliary soldier.